All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be a review of this knife, and this is the American Buffalo Knife and Tool Roper Knives Stockman in black jigged bone. So American Buffalo Knife and Tool is actually a company that I had become aware of because I think of a post on Reddit. I saw one of their knives and was interested in it. And then I got to meet them at Blade Show and got to talking with them, and they were kind enough to send this and another knife along for review. So I was interested in checking it out because I'm always interested in other or new traditional knife brands. And so they aren't necessarily a manufacturer. This knife is made in China, but they're another brand that I think I haven't seen as much about online as, say, something like, Case or Rough Rider or Great Eastern Cutlery. So I wanted to check them out and do a review. Now, first of all, if you enjoy videos on traditional knives, make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the bell and select all so you know when I post new videos. And also check out my other social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts. But moving on to the knife, this is a small to medium-sized Stockman. It has the classic serpentine pattern to the handle, and then also the classic clip point main blade, and then a sheep foot secondary and a spay secondary. So a pretty classic Stockman style knife in a pretty typical size. So it's not a massive knife, it's not a tiny knife. I'll show you in size comparison to a Rough Rider medium Stockman, and then a Great Eastern Cutlery Dixie stock knife. So you can see that it is, pretty medium sized knife. And it has carbon steel. So that's one of the kind of features of this knife. It's 1065. So 1095 is what I think people are probably more familiar with. 1095 is what Great Eastern Cutlery uses a lot. 1065 is basically just going to be a lower, carbon percentage. So you have a little bit less carbon in there versus 1095. But I am not a steel expert, so that's not really what I do in my reviews. It's not a specifications review. It's just about the knife itself. Now, this is a pretty budget-friendly knife. So this knife is on Amazon for about $21, $22. So, it definitely is in that Rough Rider price range. So it is not going to be really comparable in quality to something like a Great Eastern Cutlery. Now, this is a super premium knife that even on the primary market costs basically 10 times as much, certainly on the secondary market. So it's not something that I can really genuinely compare to that. But it is something that I can compare to a Rough Rider. Now, this Rough Rider would be a little bit more expensive. It's a little bit different because it is more of a modern construction knife with the screw construction, and this has VG10 steel, so definitely not a carbon steel. But I would say that the quality is pretty comparable. So, neither of them are perfect. The Roper, has some slight gaps in the back springs, slight gaps between the covers and the bolsters. It does have a shield, which does not look to be pinned, but the jigging on the bone is really nice. It's a kind of a unique, almost cougar claw or worm bone style jigging, in my opinion. And the action is really nice on these blades, similar to a Rough Rider. If you've had Rough Riders, they tend to come with pretty nice action, and same deal here on the Roper Stockman. Nice action open, no blade play side to side. You can see this says 0425 on it, but the tang stamp here says RP0001CBK, which is what's on the box, and then PRC for People's Republic of China. And then same deal on the secondaries. So no blade play, nice action on the sheep foot, no blade play, nice action on the spay blade. Now, neither, Rough Riders nor honestly this knife are super thinly ground. So sometimes, they will be, these budget knives will be ground nicely for cutting. This one's not super thinly ground. So I'll show you on the sheet foot here. You know, it's reasonably ground, but it's not that thin. I'll show you how it cuts here on a piece of paper. So, you know, it's gonna cut for sure. Comes with a reasonable edge. Definitely no trouble. And that's true on the other blades also. So I'll show you a couple cuts here. And then on the spade blade. Now it's always harder to cut on this edge of paper, so we'll see how this goes. Yeah, it cuts well. But the edges are relatively thick, I would say. They're not super thin edges either, but they're well sharpened. They're very smooth edges. So it is gonna cut, you know, when you get it, but you know, it just might not be the world's sliciest knife. Now, I don't see any pin cracks on mine, which is always nice. You know, on these budget knives, sometimes there are pin cracks, but like I said, there are some gaps and things like that on the back springs in between the covers and the bolsters and liners, all that kind of stuff. As for spacing, it's pretty good. I do think that there's a little bit of rubbing there, but it's not too bad, and not too much on the main blade, although it gets pretty close and might be rubbing against the liner there at the tip. I'll show you the tip on this knife because it does get to be a pretty wide secondary bevel. You can see how that's pretty wide there. And I think that's just because, you know, it doesn't get super thin towards the tip. But I think that this is a good, you know, budget-friendly traditional knife. You can get yourself a really, you know, traditional Stockman for a pretty budget-friendly price. And that's something there's not a huge amount of. I mean, certainly you can get Rough Riders and things like that. But I'm always happy to see other brands like, you know, these Roper knives from American Buffalo Knife and Tool. There's a little cowboy in all of us. I guess that's true. And the other thing here is that they do have a limited lifetime warranty. So you can read through this if you would like to. But it's always nice to have that warranty. That way, you know, if you do get this knife and have trouble, you can contact them and they should help you out. But I think that this is a nice little knife for the price. You know, certainly it is not a case knife or definitely a GEC knife, but it is a very, very budget-friendly knife at around $20 that you can get, use, you know, throw in your tackle box or something like that, where you know, just need to have a knife that's going to cut, and you want to have a traditional knife because you appreciate the aesthetic. I think that these are a good option. Not necessarily something for a collector, I would say. If you're collecting knives, maybe, you know, you might want to go with case or GEC, unless you're just trying to try out a pattern. That's another thing I always have recommended Rough Rider knives for. But I think that these can do the same thing, is if you're interested in trying out a pattern but don't want to pay that, you know, $60, $80, $100, $200 that a case knife or a gradation cutlery knife will be in that pattern, or wait for them to make that pattern and try to get it if it's a gradation cutlery knife, you can get something like this, try out the pattern, put it to use, not worry about, you know, beating it up, and see if you really like it enough to collect this pattern. So I think that's another value in these really budget-friendly traditional knives, is it allows you a chance to, you know, check out a pattern without having to worry about it too much. So I really appreciate American Buffalo Knife and Tool and Blackbird Products Group and Roper Knives, the whole kind of thing, sending this knife along for review. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If so, make sure you give it a thumbs up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these knives, especially if you've had them, because like I said, they sent this knife and one other knife, so I only have seen 2 of these knives really in person beyond the ones that I saw at Blade Show. So I'd be interested to hear your experiences with this brand. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.